Calling to order the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole for Thursday, July the 11th. Clerk, please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Present.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Brown. Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Council President Brady.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Public comment.
We have several persons who would like to address council. The first is Audrey Morris.
There.
There you go.
Okay. Council President, Council, I'm Audrey Morris, speaking again for the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland regarding the two sheriff resolutions before you today. Yesterday, our letter to the editor appeared on cleveland.com, a copy of which has been provided to you. We have now studied the alternative charter amendment proposed by Mr. Tuma, Mr. Jones, and Ms. Simon, and find that it goes a long way toward improving the independence of the county sheriff without returning that important office to its former partisan and unaccountable status. Our editorial didn't address the part of that alternative that concerns the actual management and oversight of county jail operations. Here is what we have learned. The current brief charter provision, while providing that the appointed sheriff possess certain qualifications, does not require any specific background or training in the overall supervision of jails. The new proposal before you instead mandates that a newly appointed sheriff remediate that lack by undergoing a certification process during his or her first year in office. We looked through the websites of the National Sheriff's Association, the American Correctional Association, and the American Jail Association, and read about their certification programs for those entrusted with operating or administering correctional institutions. The three options named in the proposal appear to be both rigorous and thorough, and the fourth option leaves open the possibility that the new appointee may already have fulfilled the professional requirement in a different way, which would be determined by county council. It seems to us that this alternative resolution addresses all the substantive issues people have raised regarding the knowledge and independence of our county sheriff. We urge all council members to choose this road rather than revert to the previous elective system whereby some perennial elected officials were able to abuse their power. Thank you.
Next is Mr. William Tarter.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council President Brady, members of council. My name is Will Tarter. I'm a citizen from District 6, and before I begin my remarks, I want to salute David, Hannah, and the team at Destination Cleveland for a well-run All-Star Game weekend. I really want to salute the team over there. I do not speak on behalf of my employer or any other civic entity, but I rise this afternoon to speak on two issues on today's agenda. The first issue is the question of an elected sheriff. I was a member of the 2012 Charter Review Commission. We debated extensively whether we should have an elected sheriff or continue to have an appointed sheriff. In the end, we agreed on an appointed sheriff, but with more protection, including a staggered term from the county executive and added protections such as supermajority approval by council for removal. But both the 2012 and 2017 Charter Review Commissions also urged this council to add the issue of campaign finance to the county. Currently, Cuyahoga County has no campaign finance limits. The argument from several council members was that due to federal rulings, that adding campaign finance language would not protect against big moneyed interest and that one needed to raise lots of money in order to be a viable candidate for countywide office. Though I disagreed with that point of view as a basis for not having any language at all in the first place, if that is what one believes, then what do you think is going to be necessary to be a viable candidate for countywide elected sheriff. We're saying that the candidate who is tasked with county investigations, the office that we want to be as insulated as possible from political activity, will have to raise lots of money from interest and earn countywide political endorsements in order to get there. It's not that I'm against an elected sheriff, but it makes no sense to have an elected sheriff without campaign finance rules in place first at the county level. I urge this council to adopt the recommendations from the 2012 Charter Review Commission. First, amend the charter to strengthen the protection of the appointed office of the sheriff. Then revisit the campaign finance issue by ordinance if necessary, and then return to the conversation of having an elected sheriff once those rules are in place. The second issue that I'd like to speak on is the hotel bed tax increase. To be clear, a few weeks ago, I supported the hotel bed tax increase in order to go towards the capital maintenance costs of the sports facilities. But this legislative proposal goes a step further. This proposal would take money from the 0.25 sales tax fund and redirect that money to the sports facilities. This would be an unprecedented departure from the standard procedure of using Syntax dollars to maintain the stadiums. My question to the administration would be if this is the beginning of a precedent of maintaining the stadiums. The sales tax, the 0.25 sales tax, brings in a conservative $52 million per year. If there are no fiscal guardrails for using sales tax dollars from this 0.25 sales tax fund on sports facilities, this legislation has the opportunity to open the floodgates and become an even larger fiscal impact on the overall ability or inability to provide county services with a tangible return on that investment. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Council.
And the final speaker is Mr. Michael Hammer.
Good afternoon, County President and members of the council. I'm here to speak on behalf of the bed tax. As a hotel operator, I become welcome guests every day into our city. And from time to time again, comments from our staff about what a great city we have. And many times they are surprised by all that we do in this throughout this area, from the downtown University Circle to the Cotw County and all over the county. Today, I want to recommend or share my support for the proposal on the 1% bed tax that you are considering. As a hotelier, I'm generally not supporting of increasing costs to our hotel guests, but in this case, it has a long-term benefit and a positive impact on our county. Travel and tourism is a growing industry in our county, actually 8 times higher than most industries, or most cities, national growth rate. This is constant and sustained efforts to promote the county as a destination that we are working hard at. Visitor volume is at an all-time high, and guests are spending nearly $6 billion per year in our area at hotels, restaurants, attractions, and many other businesses, large and small. So with more than 68,000 people employed in our industry, and that's almost a 12% increase over the last 8 years. So providing additional funding for this tourism and travel industry is an investment in our own success. So I hope you will vote to support the industry's upward trajectory. Thank you.
That's it, Mr. President.
Thank you. We have first of all, we have a presentation from Dave Gilbert, the CEO of the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission and Destination Cleveland. But what I'd like the clerk to do is go ahead and read in the ordinance for the 02019. And before we begin that discussion, because we'll go directly into the discussion after that about the bed tax. And so I think it would be appropriate if the clerk would read that into the record at this time.
Yes, Mr. President. Ordinance number 2019-0009, enacting Chapter 724 of the Cuyahoga County Code to authorize an increase by 1% of the bed tax for the purpose of paying the direct and indirect costs of constructing, improving, expanding, equipping, financing, or operating a convention center.
All right. Mr. Gilbert, could you come forward? Good to see you.
See you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you for the time and to all of council. While this is coinciding with the proposed legislation, here to give a presentation as we are instructed to do every year to county council related to the organization. So that we're really going to go through very briefly just a little bit about what we do, its effectiveness, and how we spend our money. We'll try to cover it in about 10 minutes. So just very briefly, our job as an organization is to make Cleveland a destination city. And we set a goal a number of years ago of 20 million visits per year by 2020. That number in 2012 in 2012 was below 15 million. And we're making a lot of progress, and we think we should be able to hit that number or be awfully close. It's a huge growth in the industry. What we do, that really comes down to two things. Our job is to change perceptions of Cleveland. And I think for the record, very important to note, our brand to the outside world is Cleveland. Cleveland does not connote the municipality of Cleveland. For us, the outside world knows the region as Cleveland, and that's how, when all of our research, that people don't make a distinction when you're talking to folks in Pittsburgh or Columbus or Indianapolis and so on. And our job is to attract people, and it's for jobs. It all comes down to money: new jobs, residents, business, and taxes. And we do it in a number of different ways. First and foremost, marketing. We are the organization that markets Cleveland to the outside world. I'll talk a little bit more about how we do it, but we, day in, day out, you don't see a lot of our work here, because when you're seeing pure Michigan here, we're doing our thing in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia and in other cities around the region. We attract meetings, conventions, and events. In those first two, we have 12 full-time salespeople. All they're doing is helping to attract meetings and conventions to Cleveland. Our job is to work hand in hand with the convention center to fill that place day in and day out and fill the hotels. We generate national media, engage significantly on social media. We just got some numbers around MLB All-Star, and it was fascinating, the social media. It wasn't because of the baseball game. It was because our social media command center was active over about 90 hours in 6 days, full-time staffed, generating social media buzz about Cleveland under the context of the All-Star game. That would not have happened had we not existed. Our job is to take big platforms and to enhance what the world sees about us. We inspire and cultivate local pride, critically important to our business and how we get more people to ultimately come to Cleveland, and we enhance the visitor experience. It's a big part of what we do. These are 20 million visits. They're our customers. They are customers. They're coming to our region. They're spending their money, and our job is to do everything we can to make sure that they have great customer service. And the impacts of our work. These are the latest numbers that we have for 2017. I'm not going to, I think you see them in front of you, but the fact is they are going up dramatically, and they are very big money. I think I would really bring attention. I'll show you in a minute to jobs. That's one that is just critically important. But the work we do on it, just what I would tell you is there is an enormous return on investment, and we can prove it. We show it. We research it. We're not judged by our activity. We're judged by our progress. And this is just one measure. It's not that Destination Cleveland had everything to do with this, but in 2012 we made a very concerted effort to change locals' perception of their own community, so they would then convince their friends and family to come to Cleveland. If you look at these numbers, it's remarkable. It has to do with a lot of things other than us, but we are the ones that are promoting it and spending the time and energy. If you look at since 2012, the growth in the number of visits to Cleveland for leisure business travel not only is up every year, it's up above the national average. It is a growth industry. And you look at the graph on the right, that's a basic measure, a real great measure of how many hotel rooms we sell. And the fact is, the number of hotel rooms sold continues to go up dramatically. Here I talked about jobs. In 2011, the number of jobs by Bureau of Labor Statistics in the hospitality and leisure industry was under 61,000. Today it's 68,000. From different research, we've had one of the two fastest growing industries in Cuyahoga County. And important to note, we compete every day. All of these groups, and this is just a sample of the organizations and the cities we compete with to do the same stuff. They all have budgets, some smaller, some the same, some larger. But the fact is, we don't do this in a vacuum. And if we don't continue to compete, we're going to go downhill. A lot of nuance to this, but the basics of how we're funded. And important to note, there's over 2,500 destination marketing organizations, or CVBs, in our national association all over the country. There's about 100 in Ohio. And every one of them, every single one of those 2,500 is funded in one way, shape, or form by a hotel bed tax. We're not unique. It's just how entities like ours are funded in Ohio. They are funded. It's governed by state law, and counties then are involved across the state in collecting and auditing and distributing the tax. Can ask questions a little later if you're interested about the different taxes, but this is very important how we spend our money. Last year in our audited statement, and we are audited. Our auditors are private auditors that are chosen by the state of Ohio. We get a full audit each year. Anytime you want it, we have it. We account for every penny we spend, and this is what we spend it on. Largely on marketing and sales, but partnerships. Only 8% goes to operations and administration, and destination development is really about the customer service portion. Also very important, under destination management and capital, we also account for, by law, separately, the dollars we spend from the 1.5% bed tax that needs to be spent on tourism-related capital. Our auditors separate that out, and this is a list of the things in 2018 that we spent those dollars on. Big thing, it's return on investment. The first one we're incredibly proud of. We do measurement of all of our campaigns. And we use national firms, and in fact, interesting, the firm that this first one shows, same firm that the state of Michigan uses for Pure Michigan when they're measuring the effectiveness of that campaign. And a lot of people know that one because they spend a lot of money on it. What the research shows is for every dollar we spend on our marketing campaigns, it translates into $195 in visitor spending. That means if we're doing a marketing campaign in Pittsburgh and they go out and they test it, it says that people who saw those ads, it converted into people visiting that averaged $195 in direct sales in Cuyahoga County. That had that dollar not been spent, that $195 would not have been spent in Cuyahoga County. And then the last one is also very important, I think probably very relevant to the county, in that the dollar spent on travel and tourism generates what amounts to about $1,100 in taxes for every household in Cuyahoga County. A little bit, just a quick on what's next, and this is just part of where we're going. We've been asked a lot over the past several years to use the brand and what we do to change people's perception of Cleveland to how can it translate into more than just attracting visitors? How can it attract talent? How can it attract people to move here? And it's what we're really focusing on, brand new strategies calling Harnessing the Power of the Visitor. Basically what it means is we look at these people as our customers. We have 20 million visits a year, 20 million opportunities to get people to think differently about our community. So instead of just the dollars that they spend, how do we also utilize those as potential? We look at it as you have chance for millions of first dates. How do you get some of those into long-term relationships? More people to move here, to invest here, to go to school here, and others. And we think that we're really getting into a lot of strategies related to that, which can leverage even more the dollars that we spend to bring the people in. So again, it's all about that. We work together. Will, thank you for the kind comments on the All-Star Game. With Sports Commission taking the lead, Destination Cleveland did the national marketing work hand in hand with the Indians, with the city. It is a team effort, and our job ultimately is to make Cleveland a destination city. So thank you, and open it up for any questions.
Thank you, David. And, congratulations to you and all of us on the success of the All-Star Game on Tuesday.
Thank you.
It's quite an event.
I'd say it was a great week for Cleveland. We're all you felt the energy for an entire week. It was pretty neat.
That's right. Questions by the committee? Councilwoman.
Through the chair to Mr. Gilbert, have you surveyed visitors to see how they like Cleveland Visit when they come?
Mr. Chair, to the councilwoman, we do that regularly. we're very research oriented. And so before we think about, I'll give you a good example, is our wayfinding signage that we did. That came about from surveys of visitors who said, you have lousy pedestrian wayfinding, and we have a hard time finding our way around. So we look for where there are issues. In fact, we have a real-time survey. We're up to, gosh, I forgot the number now, but it's over 1,000 a month of surveys of visitors that give us feedback on their customer experience. Some of those we hand off to the airport or the city or other people, and some we take charge of how to help mitigate those issues that they see.
So you brought up a point. So when you send them off to the airport or to other, are you following up to make sure those things are addressed, or how's that?
We are to the best of our ability. And by the way, this is compliments and complaints. This doesn't just mean, this is when people say wonderful things, which the majority do, we make sure that all those are passed along. And I think it goes back to that slide about together. You know, what we know is there are a lot of things sort of between the lines that nobody controls, so we try to take care of it. Those things within the lines, we pass off, we do the follow-up. Sometimes we don't have control over whether things get done, but we absolutely do the follow-up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Other questions by the committee for Mr. Gilbert at this time? All right, well, hearing.
I'll pile on the compliments, because I think that if yesterday and the day before, or I guess it was Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and all the stuff that happened on the weekend was a success because of, I think you guys were the driving sales force. My expectation is that that was a small example of what we're going to see when the NFL draft comes here. Could you cover what took place? If you're one of the sales driving factors on that, could you give us some kind of expectation of what that will mean to this area? This was a phenomenal weekend, and everything I'm looking at, that even blows away what we just got done seeing.
Mr. Chair to the Councilman, it's amazing what the NFL draft has become. That was about a 3-year process to have Cleveland awarded one of the drafts. As some of you may have seen on TV, it's become now one of the largest sporting events, which essentially is not even a competition, one of the largest attended sporting events in the country. Nashville estimated last year they had 200,000 people a day, more than half from out of market. So as big as MLB All-Star Game was, it's fair to assume probably twice the number of people in for the NFL draft. And the neat thing is it's all free. So it's just become this huge football party that I can't explain why, to see a card pulled and a name, announced, hundreds of thousands of people come, but I'm glad they do, because they're coming to our city. And we now have about 20 months to prepare, and we're going to have a big organizing committee structure, lots of people and organizations in the community to make sure that we are absolutely at our best. And we had a half a dozen of the event people from the NFL here during we were hosting them during the All-Star time this past week. So they were looking around, seeing what the lakefront looked like, the malls, the convention center, and I think they have very big plans. So we're pretty excited.
And following up on that, you said that was probably a 3-year program to get them here. Because I had some involvement in my other life as far as bringing an industrial convention here, I think a lot of people don't understand what it takes, how many years that a planned event comes before it occupies our convention center. What's the average usual length of time that somebody is doing, comparing our city to Indianapolis to everything, before it makes a commitment in any one city, and how far in advance they have to be booking hotel rooms and reservations and all that? What is the average time that you're working to do that?
I'd say the average is about 18 months. Generally, the larger the meeting or convention, the longer the lead time they need, because they need so much more in a city. Things may not be available. Sometimes we're working on things 4 or 5 years in advance. You see some of the big cities, the biggest convention cities like Vegas, they're booking things out 12 and 14 years in advance, believe it or not. It's nuts how far out some of those are. But I would say on ours, the average is really 18 to 24 months. And usually it's a 6 to 12 month sales cycle. By the time you receive an RFP, request for proposals, until they close it. And a lot of times our work, we don't, now we're making the cut much more. You can't take for granted that we even get sent the RFP. We have to work hard, so they would just say, we will put Cleveland in the consideration set, and then we take it from there.
And who's doing that on behalf of the city of Cleveland, the county, our hotel that'll be the recipient convention center? What group is actually going out and making that sales cycle for that 24 months?
Destination Cleveland is they're often, particularly for citywide groups that we use 3 or more hotels. Destination Cleveland will take the lead. We'll be at the table with many of our hotel partners. At the same time, the convention center has a sales team. We work hand in glove with them. They know the building far better than we do, and when we bring customers in, we're working on it together. Hotels are often working. They have regional, national sales teams, and local if they're working on a one hotel piece of business. But any larger meeting or convention, Destination Cleveland takes the lead on. On major sporting events, it's the Sports Commission, separate organization, because we actually run and manage it. So when these events are in town, Sports Commission takes on the role of managing all or most of those events.
And I think that it didn't get touched on in your presentation, but the RNC, when it came here, you guys played a role in that too. I thought behind the scenes on that proposal. I don't see it in your.
We did. So RNC had a separate host committee, as those of you probably know. And by law, that event, a DNC or an RNC, must have a separate nonprofit, nonpartisan host committee. And that host committee, and it's a really good example, is responsible for the nuts and bolts. What Destination Cleveland did in this regard was we oversaw and took charge of all the national media. And we did a study afterward, and we spent 18 months, a long time, working really hard on making sure that the national media who were here, that they were covering Cleveland and the region, not just the politics of the convention. We did a study on all of the media. We had 4 times the number of stories about Cleveland from during the time of the RNC than Philadelphia had written about Philly. And
their story wasn't very good that they told of Philadelphia, as I recall.
Well, we won't talk about how much was positive or negative.
No, I don't mean
that.
I'm not talking about the political side. I'm talking about the way they operated the convention.
Well, exactly.
Right. The mechanics of what the city did to support it.
Yes.
Yes.
But what it shows is, without our efforts, I mean, we believe there's every reason to believe our efforts led to 4 times the number of national media. We have 15,000 media here. I mean, we had literally billions of media impressions about Cleveland. And I could tell you, I believe very strongly the NFL draft would not be here had we not successfully run the RNC. And these things just continue to build on each other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Gallagher?
Dave, are you audited?
Mr. Chair, to the council, we are. We're audited each year. The state of Ohio chooses our auditor. In the past, they have done the audit at times. Most of the time, they choose a private auditor. We give them a list. Right now, it's done by Conan Company, local, and then they give it to us. They give it to the state, and it's public. It's for public view.
And it's published?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the 1.5% can only be used on capital. Do you have anything planned for that?
Well, yeah, so we account for it separately. Some of it goes to the debt we pay toward other things, a lot of destination management pieces. We actually, our board approved, we're going to be doing this fall, we're getting a bunch of groups together to do a destination management plan, a full audit of customer experience with outside consultants, and people like Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Universe Circle Inc., Land Studio, a lot of folks to really help us determine how it best should be spent. And it's about our job. We believe our job is to spend the incremental money to make great experiences connecting the dots. So we're going to be doing a big study to do even more of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Questions? Councilman Conway.
Through the chair to Mr. Gilbert, how closely do you work with the RTA regarding their service?
Council chair to the council, and we have a terrific relationship with RTA. We, particularly when it comes to big meetings, conventions, we'll do a lot with. We try to have meetings and conventions if they choose. We can't force them. Pre-purchase. Red Line rapid tickets, very cheap for and convenient for their conventioneers. And especially, again, the bigger the event, the more we bring RTA to the table with the planning in lots of different things that we do. Marketing, you probably saw a lot of things around the city. RTA had the faces on the trolleys. We paid for that. We that was part of the marketing of the event, but they were a great vehicle for it. So very good relationship.
Any complaints in terms of surveys in regards to that and the service?
Not really. And one thing there's the majority of the folks that come into the majority of the visitors will be downtown to University Circle, and we think between the free trolley service and the health line, there seems to be terrific service that visitors really enjoy.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any further questions? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go into the discussion about the bed tax. And first, we're going to have Dennis Kennedy.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good to see everybody again. As you know, there is legislation pending for the approval of increase in the bed tax of 1%. We estimate that that will generate approximately $4.6 to $4.7 million of revenue annually. I believe, as Mr. Gilbert said, the impact on the bed tax has been trending upwards over the past several years. We're now approaching, for 2018, we were just a little bit south of $26 million. 2017 was $23.9 million, so we're heading in the right direction. As we said, we will most probably generate between $4.6 to $4.7 million, which will then free up money in the general fund, because this money will go towards paying some of the convention center debt. So we hope that council will pass this legislation. I know, talking to the staff and to the county executive, everybody has very positive hopes for this, and I think it's a good piece of legislation that I encourage everybody to support. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. Questions by the committee? Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair to Mr. Kennedy, has there been any, I know there's been conversations about the increase of the 1%. I don't know if it came from the administration or from Destination Cleveland, but have we reached out to the small bed and breakfasts and the small business people that would be impacted by this?
I don't believe, Councilwoman Conwell, that anybody in the administrative side, at least in my office, has done. I'm not sure if anybody's done anything from Destination Cleveland. The legislation itself is scheduled to start January 1st of 2020. We did talk to the council staff to make sure that we would have enough time on the administrative side to notify everybody, to make sure that everybody is in compliance with the new rates.
Okay, and in the legislation, will this, is this for a set time period in terms of the increase of the 1%?
I don't believe there's a sunset provision in there.
Okay, so how would individuals know?
40 years.
Okay, it's 40 years is in there? Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at is, so if it gets voted that we increase the 1%, how will the small businesses be assured that it won't increase in another 5 years?
I believe that would be up to the council they would have to pass, you would have to pass as a body another increase.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt, but state law limits us to how high we can go. And with what's in the ordinance being considered today, we've maxed out under state law. So in order for it to go any higher, the state would have to change the state law.
The state would.
Okay, so if we pass this, then we'll be maxed out?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can you identify the 4.6 or 4.7 million as to where exactly it will be used for? I know that some of it will be used for convention center, but there's a breakdown, isn't there, as to where these funds would be utilized?
Well, there's, Councilwoman Baker, there's some discussions about what the extra money would be used for.
Okay.
As far as I'm aware now, those are still being worked on in terms of the administration.
Do we know how much of that 4.6 or 4.7 will be used specifically for the convention center?
The amount that's collected has to go to the convention center, but that will then displace the money that we currently use from the general fund to do that,
I see.
which will free that money up for other use.
Okay, and are we at a point where we can talk about those other uses, or has that not been identified?
Good afternoon, County Council Trevor Meckler, council staff. Councilwoman Baker, yes, I think we're at a certain point where we could talk about some of the plan uses. It's been reported on. The intention would be that 100% of the 1% bed tax, based off what the fiscal officer said, would go towards convention center debt or operating expenses.
Okay.
That in turn would free up the general fund money. For dollar, the plan use for that would be 60% of that money, what that dollar amount would be, would go towards a sports facility fund for either major capital repairs or other upgrades to either the basketball arena or the progressive field.
Okay.
And then the remaining 40% would go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum for the rock and roll induction ceremonies every 2 years. That currently, the rock and roll induction ceremonies are funded out of Destination Cleveland's current revenue that they get. That obligation would be freed up, so Destination Cleveland would in turn have additional revenue to do as Mr. Gilbert presented to you a little bit ago.
Okay, good, thank you. If I may, the sports facility fund is 60% of these dollars. Is that enough for what we need? Is that just, how do we know that 60% of the dollars going into the sports facility is the number that is needed? I take a leap that the 40% for the rock and roll induction is probably a pretty solid number.
If I can speak to the 40% first, the 40% threshold number was calculated based off what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would need to continue to adequately fund the induction ceremonies every 2 years, and a commitment to have enough resources to be able to do that. It's Tim Oftermet, the CFO of the Rock Hall, is here. There's maybe further questions about that, but they needed a dollar amount commitment, and that 40% threshold is approximately what they need to have a sustainable revenue stream to be able to hold the induction ceremonies here every two years. The 60% going into the sports facility fund, I can't answer that question if it's enough money or not. We don't know what the needs will be, but this is certainly a starting point. We looked at this as an option with the council president and the county executive as a revenue stream that could assist in future capital repairs or upgrades to the professional sports arena or ballpark, so that it's a starting point, but I can't speak to it if it's enough.
I could just add, then just follow up with the 100% of the 1% bed tax going for the convention center operations and expenses. Is that a number that we feel comfortable is enough to take care of what it is that we need to do for that convention center?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it is.
It's already budgeted coming out of the general fund, so we're just going to, as I said, we're going to displace
Replace
that
it.
money with this, which will free up for those distributions that Trevor talked about.
All right, I thank you.
It was reported in a local publication, I think it was, that that our bed tax was 18%. Is that correct? It doesn't sound like, based on what you're talking about, that's the statutory allowed amount Maximum would, as I think I heard from the law director, is 6.5?
6.5.
Yeah, 6.5, yeah, 6.5.
Just to be clear there, Mr. Chairman, that's what the county's authorized to put on.
Right.
Municipalities also put taxes on overnights.
Right, so that would be at 3%, as I understand, which is the city of Cleveland. So total-wise, that would be at 9.5%, is that if I'm understanding the math? The newspaper made it sound as though the 8% is a sales tax in reality, but that was not really clearly discussed. Is our bed tax going to be even close to that when we're all finished? The 18% that was in that local publication?
I don't believe so, but I would have to check with the publication to see where they got their sources from.
Yeah, okay, well, I think that at least what I'm hearing from the law director, that probably is not the right bed tax number. That's a sales tax combination with that out there. When people are comparing that to other cities, they need to be comparing apples and apples as opposed to mixing different numbers, it sounds like, from that respect. I think there's a lifeline somebody's going to throw out there.
I was going to add, we did ask David Gilbert to be prepared to come in and speak upon this if he can come up for a minute. And Councilman, you are right, between the bed tax and the sales tax, but I would rather him come up and
Okay, so when someone says that Las Vegas has a much lower bed tax, they're really not correctly reporting the facts. Is that a proper statement? So I want to make sure that when people are understanding what this council is discussing, we are only discussing the bed tax. We are not discussing the ability of some other department to put a sales tax on that's outside of our control.
Thank you, Mr. Chair of the council. We keep close tabs on all this with competitors. So overall, right now.
Please share that with other places in town. Maybe,
Sure,
perhaps.
sure. So right now, if you stay in a hotel in the city of Cleveland, the total tax paid, which is bed tax plus all sales taxes, and combined is 16.5%. So in the county right now is 4. This would make 5. Plus the 1.5. So if this passes, you would have 6.5% bed tax from the county in total.
Bed tax.
Bed tax. You would have 3% there for the city of Cleveland. Every municipality can add their own, and they're all different. The city does 3, many have 0. So there are places in the county where the total is 13.5%, not 16.5.
Bed tax.
Correct. In total. So bed tax is county. With this proposal, total county of 7.5%, total city of Cleveland 3%. Some cities don't have that at all. The remainder being sales tax. So if the total becomes 17.5%, it's one of the higher in the country. But a couple interesting facts. Right now, Columbus and Cincinnati are both at 17.5%. And what I would tell you is the top 85 markets or I think it's top 83 markets in the country are all between 14 and 18%. So overall, while be slightly higher than many, it's all in a very narrow window. One other fact is our room rates are very low. So the overall that a customer would pay. But I hope that explains a little more of how the tax is broken down.
In most of the cities that were listed in that article, many of them have a destination resort fee that goes on top of that. Do our hotels have the $25 to $50 resort fee that like Las Vegas has on every single room? If you check the math, is on a hotel in Las Vegas. Or do we have that in our hotels here in town?
We don't. It's a great point. I don't think we have any resorts, but
well, I think it's a resort town. Come on, we got a beach, we got water.
It's a great point because all that's ever reported on is the bed tax. But there are all over the country other taxes. Some call it a resort fee, some call it a tourism improvement district fee, or some other name that doesn't even count for that. So we're talking about some cities, municipalities reporting their total tax of bed tax and sales tax might be 15, but they might really have 20, but all that's reported on is sales and bed tax. So even some of the numbers that are reported of where we stand aren't exactly apples to apples. So it's a really good point, and we don't have any of those additional.
I think the people need to understand what what it costs to put on a convention center, a hotel, bringing events like the RNC, like the baseball All-Star game, like the NFL draft, and those are the direct costs of what it takes to bring those here for the restaurants to get the benefit, for the bars and all the other things that ripple through that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Strawn. Thank you, Councilman Strawn. Thank you, Councilman Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Director. When are the bonds on the convention center going to be paid off?
That would be, there's been so many bond issue questions.
Sorry. Bob Franz, Municipal Advisor to the county. Due to the final maturity of the convention center bonds is 2027, December 1, 2027.
And when the bonds are paid off, would this bed tax money be needed for operations, or would the operations be covered elsewhere?
Go ahead.
Okay. The operations of the convention center would likely be covered under the existing payment structure to the facility. So the 1% going to them and whatever else is needed to fund that fixed payment there would likely be enough. That 1% also gets used to help fund debt service on the hotel as well after that, after the bonds are matured. So again, that's projected, and what happens in 10 years or 8 years is anybody's guess, but that can be changed, but that was always what was contemplated.
Okay. Second question is, as you stated, if the bed tax were to pass, it would free up money in the general fund, and 40% of it would be used to fund the induction ceremonies, which would mean that money would be freed up in Destination Cleveland. And my question is, how does the size of the amount of money that would be freed up in Destination Cleveland compare with the amount of money that we asked them to contribute toward the Q renovation project? Is it comparable? Is it half of it, or how do those two things compare?
Councilman Miller, in 2016, related to the Quicken Loan Arena transformation project, Destination Cleveland agreed to give up approximately $44 million over the course of 18 years out of the 1.5% bed tax. This does not get them completely back to the $44 million, but it's pretty close to try to restoring their commitment, the money that was taken for the basketball arena project, but it's not 100%.
Okay. And final question. Are we going to set up a separate fund to handle this money that's freed up in the general fund, or is it going to be simply paid out of the general fund?
Right now, Councilman, there's nothing specified in the legislation. We will have discussions about if there is a need to set up a segregated restricted fund. I believe that there are several other subordinate agreements that need to be executed first, and I'm sure we'll make that decision while those negotiations are taking place.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Miller, Councilwoman Conwell, and then Councilwoman Simon.
Through the chair to Mr. Kennedy, that was Councilman Miller's last question was kind of on my line. Who will actually monitor the facility fund for the 60% to go into? Who's gonna? Is that gonna go in?
I mean, that Councilwoman, that'll be monitored by the fiscal office and the budget department.
And then wasn't clear, I missed something. So the county pays and I know this was Mr. Gilbert, 6.5% with the increase, the bed tax. But he mentioned something about the sales tax was 7.5. I just wanted to, so that totals up to 14. But I thought he mentioned something about 17%. So I'm just trying to get my numbers right.
So there's a City of Cleveland bed tax. And
So
other,
we have to include that too?
no, we did not include that number. That number was reported in a news story. I think that's where the 16.5% number came from.
Okay.
It included the county's current 5.5% bed tax, plus the City of Cleveland's bed tax, plus the sales tax.
Okay, so not for our concern.
And the 3%, that's an option, Councilwoman, for cities. As Ms. Gilbert said, some cities have that amount, some cities have lower. There's a few that don't have any.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Simon.
Thank you. I need some clarification with regard to the Rock Hall of Fame. I understood that to be the obligation of Destination Cleveland originally, and now this is shifting to the county's obligation. How is this supposed to happen?
Councilwoman Simon, yes, that is correct. The majority of the obligation would shift to the county. It is going to require future legislation, an MOU between the county and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I believe will be done through legislation, spelling out the 40% distribution every year. And currently, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Destination Cleveland has their own MOU regarding the distribution of the bed tax. So it would look similar to that, but it would be between the county and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
When I voted to increase the bed tax and give all of that to Destination Cleveland for 40 years, the understanding I had is that the obligation would be theirs and was theirs, and now we're coming back asking for more money for that obligation. And I presume that's because there was an offering to pay some of the upgrades to the rocket facility?
So when the legislation to extend the 1.5% capital bed tax that previously went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame debt took place in 2014, you're correct. The understanding then was that Destination Cleveland would provide it's 25% of the 1.5% bed tax, approximately, to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A couple years after that, though, Councilman Simon, the agreement with Destination Cleveland to help fund the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, I think, changed the intended uses at that time of when Council passed the extension of in 2014. Destination Cleveland in 2016 agreed to provide some support to the basketball arena.
Okay, I don't know that I'm 100% comfortable with the allocation of this money. If I'm going to be supporting a bed tax increase in this climate, I don't know that without a separate piece of legislation and a consensus of where it's going to go, I'm not, we're assuming that's going to be the 60-40 split. And the 60% to some sports facility upgrade, is that the correct phraseology for which this money's intended?
So sports facility reserve fund.
Okay, so this sports facility reserve fund is in addition to the syntax money that's already in place to provide for capital repairs, correct? And this is in addition to the Rocket Mortgage facility that we just spent funding to upgrade, correct? And so there's no obligation on the 60% anywhere contractually. This is just a way that the sponsors of the legislation want to see the money spent. I want to be clear, there's no obligation to spend this millions of dollars in addition to that which we're already spending. So is that correct?
I believe that's correct based on how the legislation exists right
So why would we go ahead when I'm hearing questions like, is this enough? We don't even know what the intent, what this is for. It's some ambiguous pot of money that we're just going to fund some kind of sports upgrades that we don't even know what that's about. My question is it too much? And why wouldn't we providing money to the communities that are struggling right now with even having a playground upgrade? So I have to say that I want to see some of this money freed up. If we're going to do this, I'm going to do this, that I have a commitment to some of the communities, whether it's through the community block grant program, but I've got communities in District 11 that can't afford playground equipment, and I'm sure my colleagues might share that. For us just to commit all this money for some unclear intention other than in sports facilities, we don't, I'm not comfortable without knowing what that's for when we already have a sin tax, we're already propping up sports. And I've always been here to support sports facilities, especially one that we own. But at some point, we've got to stop, in my opinion, neglecting our communities and just putting all of our eggs in a basket. So I want to see something different than 60% going to sports funds. I want to see some money freed up for the communities.
Could we get some clarification about how bed tax funds can be used?
Mr. President, I'm clear about how they're used. This is going to go to the convention center fund and free up general fund dollars, which then could be going to communities. So I'm clear on that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. All right, Councilwoman Stevens.
One of the things you talked about was in the induction ceremony for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. How much does that cost? And how much are we talking about allocating? I know you have to build reserves, you just don't pay for it one time and you're done, but what are those dollar amounts?
Councilwoman Stevens, we have Tim Oftermatt in the audience. I would ask if he could speak up to talk a little bit about the expenses of putting on the induction ceremonies.
Mr. Chairman, to the Councilwoman, how are you? Good to see everybody. I'm Tim Oftermatt. I'm Vice President of Finance for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You may remember the work I've done for the county in the past. I'm now at the Rock Hall. However, to answer the question directly, the induction ceremonies in the past have taken place in Cleveland every 3 years. Currently, they are going to be moved to every 2 years, with the alternative year being in New York City. The last 2 times they've taken place in Cleveland, where they've taken place at Public Auditorium, they cost the Rock Hall about $7 to $7.5 million a year, and that would be both in 2015, 2017 or 2018 rather was about 8.5% higher in cost than 2015. Our cost in 2018 was roughly $7.5 million a year.
So how much are we ending up setting aside on average each year?
This particular allocation is estimated to be roughly $1.6 million.
So we just continue to build this reserve drawdown and then build the reserve up again?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. That's the way we would expect it to work.
If I might, to go back to the sports facilities reserve, do we have a specific dollar amount that we need to continue to have in reserves for the sports facilities?
Councilwoman Stevens, I don't believe we have a specific amount. I believe, as Mr. Meckler said, this is a start to accumulate some reserves to deal with costs that we know we're going to be facing over the next several years. But to say we have a specific amount as of now, I'd have to say no.
Okay, why haven't we looked at industry standards? In the housing industry and standard commercial maintenance for malls, et cetera, you have a standard reserve and replacement range that you are encouraged to put aside by your financial partners, meaning the traditional lenders and pools of investors. Why haven't we been given some type of range for what is being done nationally for the average facility? I realize that people are tearing them down and building them over again, but we've extended our useful lives, the useful life of these facilities, and it would be more comfortable for some of us if we knew that we needed to put 8% of the actual value or the 8% of the income stream or something that we could peg to into reserve funds or that equivalent in order for us to do major maintenance in the future without having to borrow the full amount. Those kinds of things help us understand how we keep these facilities in good shape so that we maintain the teams and our status as a major league city. So who does the homework for these things? So that gets to be assigned to someone from the me to the chair. Because the homework is how we get more comfortable with these things.
If I could add, Councilwoman Stevens, I know Gateway does a lot of that, so we could check with them. The one thing I will add, the sports facility fund being proposed here doesn't necessarily mean that it is for just maintenance or ongoing capital repairs. It could be used for upgrades. We do have the Cleveland Indians lease coming up in 2023, and as most of the body here knows, we had a recent Cleveland Cavaliers lease that was set to expire, and part of the lease negotiations to extend that 7 additional years, it required a general fund commitment from the county to basically do a new exterior and some other major upgrades to the Quicken Loans Arena. We're not sure what the Cleveland Indians are going to be requesting as a potential lease extension, but we know that is coming up, and we know that conversation is going to be starting here soon.
Having started my homework, because when the Cavs came, I started doing my homework. I agree with you on that. However, what we need to do is talk about what are some of our realistic ways to save for it, to use pedestrian terms so that our constituents understand, so that we build up to take care of the things that we know potentially are going to come. So we don't have a specific answer, but we have reasons why we do things rather than we just want to set aside money for them. Well, these are the kinds of things that New York has done to a facility, Los Angeles has done to a facility. This is the reason why the Chargers moved from San Diego to LA, because they were looking for these kinds of things, and the county and the city promised them there. Help us learn better what to expect so that we can be supportive if this is appropriate for what we believe is appropriate for the community.
Hold on. Councilman Shaw and then Councilman Baker again.
In 2014, how many times did the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame have an induction? What was the frequency it came to Cleveland?
I believe it was every 3 years. I would
Okay,
look back
so
to Tim to see if
did we know in 2014 that it was going to be coming every 2 years? And when was that decision made? Does anybody know?
Through the chair to the councilman, back in 2014, there had only been 3 induction ceremonies in Cleveland by that time. There was no expectation that it was going to change from every 3 years to every 2 years. The Rock Hall, Destination Cleveland, the local governments have worked very hard together to convince the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Foundation in New York that we could be successful if we were going to do it every 2 years. The 2020 induction ceremony will be the first time that there will only be a 2-year spread between one induction ceremony and another.
So 6 years after we voted will be the first time that will take place.
That's correct.
So this body was not aware that we were going to be funding some source through whatever body to fund on a by-year basis as far as from this. So that, if we use just the dollar value of what those would have been worth, that $7.5 million that I think you alluded to would have been something we could have factored in 6 years ago, but we didn't have that information, so now.
That's correct. This is a new development.
So this is a new development, and the money that we're talking about here in this allocation is going to cover about half of the cost of every 2 year. When you combine the 2 years together, it's going to cover about half the cost. So I assume you've got other funds to cover the other the portion of the $7.5 million.
Through the chair to the councilman, that's correct. Tickets are sold, other
sponsorships, all the other things, but
donations.
But we as a body, community body, felt that it was valuable to have it coming here every 2 years.
Correct.
I can only assume that we think we're the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that capital of the world, and so somebody might even be pushing to tell them we should have it here every year at some point along the way.
Through the chair to the councilman, over 93% of those that attend the induction ceremony are from outside of Cuyahoga County, and nearly all of those people stay overnight. So there's a nexus between a hotel occupancy tax.
So they're paying the bed tax, right?
They're paying the bed tax.
That's, when in 2016, that the discussion was that the contributions would be diverted. Now, this is not your question, Mr. Opperman, but when Destination Cleveland was asked to move money to the queue, they too would not have been aware at that point that we were going to a 2-year cycle for the induction ceremony.
That's correct.
So everything we're talking about is all after the fact. And now what we're saying is that's a reality. They are coming every 2 years. The queue is a reality. It did get funded for $42 million. We are now sitting here today as a whole new different set of facts, which should be reviewed under today's facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you. Just a question on the 60/40. Is there a reason why, especially since the 40% is almost equal to what Destination Cleveland needs to reimburse them for what they were going to invest in the now called Rocket Mortgage, that we don't just take the 40% and directly allocate that to Destination Cleveland and then let them stay responsible for the rock and roll funding? Why is it, what was the strat, or can't we do that perhaps? I'm not quite sure, how you can divide money up, but it just seems that we're kind of going around a circle here. Why wasn't that a direct allocation?
I think, Councilwoman, to answer your question, I think it's related to allowable uses of each bed tax.
Is it?
We are increasing, if this legislation got approved, a 1% bed tax increase that can go towards convention center operations or capital expenses. There's some other language that we could go a different route, but I mean, this is one area how we could go forward with increasing the bed tax. What we wanted to do is try to figure out a way of how to, in working with Destination Cleveland, going back to the 2016 discussions with the basketball arena, how we can try to recoup some of their revenue that they committed to that deal, as well as being able to use then our general fund that we're freeing up for appropriate uses. And this is just the formula that was created in terms of what we can use the 1% bed tax for and what we can't.
And I'm just asking because I'm not sure, but the bed tax restrictions is what you're outlining. Can't Destination Cleveland in their audit have a set aside saying that this bed tax is only to be used for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, those dollars that free up then the dollars that they were using for that purpose? I mean, is there, I guess I'm it's a little uncomfortable and kind of going around and trying to figure out how to get money to them. And then we all know that it's going to be used for their purpose, for other purposes that the bed tax wasn't designed for.
Councilwoman, I would let the fiscal officer add to this, but I think if we're freeing up the bed tax, if we're giving the bed tax to the convention center debt, and we're allocating general fund money, then I would recommend that if we're gonna do that, we should directly give it to the entity, the Rock Hall, versus giving it to Destination Cleveland and then having them get audited to see how they're spending I don't see the advantage of giving it to one entity to giving it to another entity when we could do that directly.
Okay. If I may, on another note, there was an article that mentioned, and I'm not sure if either one of you can answer, perhaps we can hear from someone. They mentioned group sales and how that could be hurt. I think it was the Ohio Association of Hotel said that individually people don't scrutinize their bill, but when they come as groups, sometimes they do look at how much more it's going to cost them to stay at one place over another. Is there anyone that can talk to that, or is it a real factor, or are they just not? Is that just not a concern?
It's, Councilwoman, I mean, I'm not an expert on the hotel, but I believe Mr. Gilbert previously mentioned you got to take into account what the room rates are as well, not just the tax. And that came up in the discussion about, as Councilman Schron brought up about the resort fees. Those are fixed dollar amounts, they're not percentages, so they're kind of regressive in how those are applied to. But I think the room rates, and we see that sometimes with the analytics that we get in the hotel tax collection side in the fiscal office, that the total cost of the room, including all the applicable taxes, is really favorable when compared to other markets. But I would leave it for the experts to.
All right. Well, that's what I kind of thought would be said. Outside of that, we have other cities that have hotels. I know in my district, I have North Olmsted, Westlake, both have hotels. Has there been any concerns, or have we reached out to other Cuyahoga County cities that will be impacted by this, that may not perhaps benefit? Certainly with yesterday, they would benefit, but there are times when they lease their space for weddings, local events, and a 1% tax could impact them to go to another county perhaps. Has any thought been, has that been talked about at all, about the other cities and how they can be impacted by that?
I am not aware, Councilwoman, of any discussions with any other communities in Cuyahoga County. I'm not sure if anybody else has had those communications.
I think Mr. Gilbert might have a comment.
Councilman, we have discussions with a number of hotels, but on a macro level, we did some research a couple of years ago. We had one of the largest firms in the country do research, and they estimated that if there were a 1% increase in occupancy tax, that they estimated it would have zero effect on any leisure travel and very, very minimal effect on any group travel, just because of what was discussed. And it is when groups publish rates. If you were to book a room, they only publish the rates. You will see on your bill the different additional taxes, but those are paid by the out-of-towners who come and stay at the hotel.
Yeah, and as long as you're there, the group sale mentality, you feel that because our hotels are lower in price, that makes up for any additional costs that we add?
We believe that's the case. We would not be advocating for this. It's, one of the things that is important to us is that one way, shape, or form, all those dollars stay within advancing the industry. And we would not be advocating for it if we felt that 1% had any type of effect on group sale. That's just our feeling when we're in the market.
Even in areas that aren't close to Cleveland, that are on the outskirts of Cleveland, but still in Cuyahoga County, that, you know, give their space for purposes outside of coming downtown.
Absolutely. And one thing important, when it comes to renting space, this wouldn't even, it's only if rooms are attached to it. So if someone holds if it's rented for meeting space or luncheons or banquets, it would only be for the out-of-towners that would come and stay along with that.
Right. But I'm speaking of rooms, not of.
Yeah. What I'd say is I think it applies to whether it's in the city of Cleveland or in the suburbs. It's, you know, when we did our research and asked the experts, they didn't make that distinction of whether it was a suburban hotel or a downtown hotel.
All right. Thank you. It's good to know.
Okay.
Through the chair to, I guess, Trevor, could you send us an allowable use for the bed taxes and what they're being used for so far?
Yeah, the current bed tax, yes,
Because you said different percentages are,
yes, yeah. I can tell you right now, or I can email it to you as well.
you can email it.
Okay.
And then MOU, Mr. Gilbert stated, I want to know what's going to happen with the MOU between the Rock Hall and Destination Cleveland if this moves forward, and we'll now have the MOU with the county and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. What's going to happen with the MOU that they have planned?
So Dave
When
can
will
come
it
up and speak to
expire?
that a little bit more if he would like, but they are going to have to negotiate a new MOU with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they are still going to contribute a smaller amount to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the induction ceremonies as well. So they're going to have to update their current MOU between the Rock Hall and Destination Cleveland.
Okay, so this 40%, if it goes through, will be our share, and then Destination Cleveland's gonna put in how much toward the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
I would ask Dave to come up and speak on that. It isn't a final number, but they are in previous discussions on what it would take to ensure there's enough funding for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremonies every 2 years to build up the reserve that we were talking about, you know, to ensure every 2 years there's enough funding, that it would be approximately $250,000 per year that Destination Cleveland would continue to contribute to the Rock
So that's still not enough. So where's the rest of the money coming from? The general fund?
The remaining balance to, as Mr. Oftermatt mentioned, they do their own fundraising and donations and corporate sponsors, tickets, covers the remaining amount to cover the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And do we know how much we generate from the induction ceremonies since it started? I know how much we're paying out, but do we know how much the county gets from hotels and all that good stuff?
Through the chair to the councilwoman, I don't know exactly, although it's something that could be closely estimated, but we had Oxford Economics do an impact study for us for the 2018 induction ceremony, and the estimate was that $4.6 million in state and local taxes was generated. Nearly all of that is from sales tax and hotel occupancy tax. So 5.5% would be related to the state sales tax, the remainder to the county levied sales tax, and then the state, and then the county and the city bed tax would account for the rest.
I got that. I wanted to, if you had more of a number about how much we actually bring in to the county or the city.
We could certainly give that a close estimate out of that $4.6 million. It's using the tax rates as a way to break that down. We could certainly estimate that and get it to you.
Okay. Does that include, when you have these conventions, we hear that an event brings this much amount of money. So that's the dollar amount that I'm looking for. What's it's bringing the hotels? What's it's bringing the
total economic impact of
restaurants?
The total economic impact of the 2018 induction ceremony was estimated to be $36.5 million.
Okay. So then it's worth.
That we know.
Okay. So then it's worth paying this what was it, 7.5 that we pay every 2 years for the induction ceremony?
That's the total cost every 2 years. The total cost, the amount of the hotel tax at $1.6 million a year would be roughly $3.2 million.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions. Councilman Strawn.
Just my colleague was talking about the hotels outside of Cuyahoga County. They're not going to be subject to the city tax, the 3%, is that correct? That doesn't transfer to the ones in the suburbs and all of those areas.
Correct. The
So
cities outside of Cleveland, it will have, if this goes into effect, it will have the 6.5% bed tax.
just the county.
Just the
So
county.
when the newspaper talks about conventions coming here, a major portion of that rate is not going to be, is not affected in the rest of the Cuyahoga County. It's just downtown City of Cleveland hotels.
City of Cleveland hotels.
Yeah. And then one of the other things that I'm concerned about is the allocation, how this goes forward, because we heard from the folks at Destination Cleveland that the lead time for some of these events go into years and years out there. What assurances do we have from the administration that these 3 buckets of money are going to be allocated in accordance with these 3 allocations? As far as the fund, the induction ceremony, and then the freeing up for funds to go to Destination Cleveland in that same 2 to 3 year window, because they are out there working and trying to bring in events here.
We, Councilman Strawn, as I said earlier, we will, at the time those subordinate agreements are executed, we'll make a determination if we need to insert language in the legislation that comes to council to segregate those funds. If not, if the decision is not, then we will set up separate cost centers in ERP and be able to identify what those costs are. I didn't, but that's what we will do. But we will do that analysis at the time these other agreements are executed.
My concern is that if these 3 items become a negotiated activity every time we do a budget, then it is not the commitment that one needs to go out and chase a major event like the NFL draft or any of those kind of things to try and get people to commit to come here. Because I know what happens. Part of that is that they are rebated funds in the way of bringing those events there.
Councilman Strawn, in discussions with the county executive and the council president, the intention is to bring forward legislation early September, where allocating these funds. We needed the legislation to be approved first, but we will have legislation in place hopefully by November if this legislation passes.
Okay, so the one can be subsequent to it as opposed to condition preceding to make sure they both are in sequence.
The effective date, if this legislation gets approved, the 1% goes into effect January 1 of 2020. So we would like those subsequent MOUs to be in place prior to the effective date.
This is not an MOU. This is a constraint upon future administrations that it would be commitments to them, not something that gets negotiated in annual MOUs or anything of that nature.
Correct. Yes, let's talk later.
Okay, thank you.
I think
All
what
right, we'll leave
we're
it there.
planning on doing will meet your concerns.
Well, it's just the business, what we heard of what it takes to make that, those things happen, that it takes a lead time of 2 or 3 years, and we even heard as long as at Las Vegas goes up multiple years to get a convention.
Thank you, and I believe the final question, apparently not, the question, Councilwoman Brown, then the final question, because we do need to move on, will be Councilwoman Simon.
Mine is very brief. This is with regards to my colleague, Councilwoman Baker, and I'm just trying to get clarity on this. When it relates to events that utilize the facilities that don't require hotel stays, like weddings and banquet rooms, does the bed tax even apply?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and Councilwoman Simon again.
The final question is, I guess, just 2-part. One, what if Rock Hall of Fame induction ceremony is pulled from Cleveland every other year, what would happen to that money? And you don't need to answer me now because they're whimsical or could be whimsical with regard to the induction. And two, with the Global Center for Health Innovation, how would any money going to the convention fund assist that facility? So I don't need answers today.
Interesting points. Okay. Well, thank you. We have two more gentlemen who would like to speak, and we'll move to that now. First, I believe Dan Walsh, President of Destination Cleveland. Cleveland Board, and also Chris Ronayne, as we all know, President of University Circle. Welcome, both of you.
Mr. Council President, Councilwomen and men, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. As you mentioned, I'm the chairman of the Destination Cleveland Board. Chris Ronayne chairs the Public Affairs Committee for the Destination Cleveland Board. And we wanted to, first and foremost, tell you that we discussed the legislation with our Board of Directors as structured and discussed today. And just to give you some sense, our board is comprised of a number of some different business leaders as well as hotel general managers, representative from the county, the city, as well as the Mayors and Managers Association. So many of the questions that you got, that each of the council people have asked today are represented, and so there's good alignment between the issues that have been discussed today and what our board has discussed relative to this legislation. And so I can say that from our perspective, contingent on the restructuring of the MOU with the Rock Hall, that we'd be supportive of this legislation, largely because of the impact that the organization continues to provide. As Mr. Gilbert outlined in his presentation, the $8.8 billion of economic impact, the job creation, and I can tell you that as a board, and as David had mentioned, Mr. Gilbert mentioned, very data-driven organization, very strategic, and through our planning and strategic plan with that we have created, it's really had an incredible impact on the city and continues to do so. And so I can tell you that I serve on a lot of different not-for-profit boards here in town as a volunteer, and this organization is incredibly efficient and prudent with the way the money is spent, but also is having a huge impact and catalyzing a lot of growth, including bringing on new hotels here in town and upgrading the hotel stock, making it a more and more attractive place, which is driven not just by the strategic plan implementation, but also the brand of our city that continues to emerge with the success of attracting all-star games, NFL drafts, and so on. And we're excited about the future and believe this additional funding will enable us to continue to grow our impact and create jobs and positive economic impact for the county.
Thank you. Afternoon, Council President, members of this body, Chris Ronayne, University Circle Inc., but for the purposes of this conversation, as Chairman Walsh said, I'm the Chair of Public Affairs for Destination Cleveland. Appreciate the opportunity to be before you today. I'll be brief because when almost all's been said, only thing is not everybody's said it, but I'll try to say just a couple of things maybe on the more sort of the stories of what we're hearing in the community around us. And you guys just experienced it this week. And frankly, the work of Destination Cleveland All-Star Week isn't over. I was in their office the day after the All-Star game, and you might expect that they're out taking a break, but remember the tall ships are coming in about this hour, and that's part of their work too. Everybody was in their seat working the next morning after the All-Star game. A number of months back, organizationally, we felt we played for the team, took one for the team, but it hurt relative to what we needed to do and thought about the future that we were trying to help partner to create. Leslie Graff, the CFO of Destination Cleveland's in the back behind David and had to deal with the reconciliation of the numbers. But I think we felt we did right by the partnership with this county and with Cleveland Cavaliers and had to pivot and figure out where we were going to go. But as you know, these events take money, and I want to talk quickly about a couple people that I've made sure to talk to. First of all, as Dan said, the board has a composition of persons you know, president of Cleveland State University, the president of Metro Hospitals, a number of hoteliers, a number of business owners in the community, a number of persons who work in small business as well. And We started objectively talking as a board through the Public Affairs Committee a number of months back about how we felt about the bed tax and what might happen with any sort of efforts to potentially reconcile through an increase. We had one member who is actually in the business of building hotels who first opposed it. And over about an 18-month discussion, iterative education process has come around to the point of view, just as of talking more with him yesterday, is in support of it because of the work that we do. We do have hoteliers who have a lot at stake, and I'm just going to reference one is Terry Augusta, who's been managing a top flight hotel that you helped build at the Hilton. Terry said, go ahead and say it. I'll say it. She said, you have to spend some money to make some money. We support this, and we'll generate letters if you need them from hoteliers throughout Cuyahoga County. But we don't oppose it. We are for it. And Terry's other reminder to us is that on top of the 98% visitorship that's coming from out of town to stay in hotels, and that cost is borne upon them, we don't take that lightly. But she said when you actually factor for the room night cost being reasonable in Cleveland in a mid-sized market, there's some absorption capacity among visitors, and that's something we forget. She wanted me to remind you of that. And to Councilwoman Conwell's point, we also have been mindful of the smaller hotels, mid-sized hotels. I've been back and forth with Glidden House, in your neighborhood and in your district, and it's not opposition there. I'm also mindful of our friend Gary Bowman, rest in peace, and what's about to take place hopefully in a succession there. We're mindful of the smaller hotels. We've not heard opposition in any kind of mass, and if there is any individual opposition, I do want to say that I've asked Kathy Mulcahy, Mayor of Orange, and your mayors and managers rep to the Destination Cleveland Board, has there been opposition? She did reference that Mayor Elkins has a philosophical difference, but that she's not heard from any other mayors of opposition relative to what this might be on effects of their hotels. Because remember, the 68,000 employees employed in this second highest growth industry now in Cuyahoga County come from all of the communities that you represent. The employee base comes from all of the communities you represent. So there's not opposition there. Finally, I just want to give you a vignette of a guy you might know. I'll leave his last name out, but Richard, who's worked many years in front of the Marriott, and I spoke with him this morning about this issue. Richard is an ex-offender. Richard has known David Gilbert since North Coast Harbor days, and he said before that, David at East Ohio, he said, I owe my job to this industry and to what Destination Cleveland is doing. I came out of being an ex-offender and got a second chance. And I just this past week received a promotion. He worked at Millennia. He's now going to work actually in the parking management. So he's moving over to, he said a promotion, but he's getting a new job with a better pay over at SP Plus Parking, who's going to actually have him back at the Marriott because he knows the people from every walk of life walking through. He knows literally the players who were walking through last week. But for him, what we represent in terms of economics and job growth has directly affected a person who's had a difficult startup in life make good of his life, and he knows how much this organization positively affects him. So with that, I just wanted, like I said, to cover some of the real deep dive we've done on trying to get where people are at on this, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and for what you're putting together as a, to us, plausible solution that everybody gives a little, and we gave. And we're hoping to be able to bring some of it back to do what we did this week and all of the weeks coming up over the next few years with all that we're hoping to bring the attention to Cleveland that David referenced. So thank you, and I can take questions.
And thank you, gentlemen. I believe we're going to be moving on because we have a pretty big subject in front of us. But again, I just want to thank Destination Cleveland for the contribution and the cooperation that it gave all of us as we were trying to seal the deal a few years ago. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Council President.
Councilman?
For point of reference, the 1% bed tax does cover all of Cuyahoga County hotels, not just downtown.
The 1%. Not the 3%. But the,
Not the 3, of
it's
course,
not
the 1%.
So information that has been disseminated was not entirely correct, I think was the point the councilman was trying to make.
Some of our hotels in some cities are putting their own city tax, though, on it.
And
So
that's
it would-
their,
Right.
yes.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to
All
know.
right. Well, thank you very much. What I'd like to do is I'd like to move this legislation out of the committee of the whole to the council agenda for consideration for second reading so that we can keep it going, and would appreciate cooperation from the council in that regard. But if moved and seconded, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it, and this will be moved to the full council for second reading. Thank you. All right. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, more or less, before we come back to the equally fascinating discussion about the charter amendments. Thank you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to reconvene the Committee of the Whole in regard to our two resolutions for submission to the electors regarding the sheriff. We'll be hearing the second one today. But Jean, if you could read them both into the record for me.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Resolution number 2019-0134, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to repeal Section 5.08 and enact Article 16 of the county charter, providing for the election of the sheriff, including the powers, duties, qualifications, and compensation of the office. And resolution number 2019-0144, providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to repeal Section 5.08 and enact Article 16 of the county charter to provide for additional requirements of the sheriff, including the powers, duties, qualifications, term, and removal process of the office.
Thank you very much. What we'll do now is we'll follow the similar platform that we had last, I believe last week, or week previous, regarding the other, the electing the sheriff. We'll have those in support, and I believe Mr. Tooma is going to take the lead in telling us what it is all about, what's in it, and his thoughts behind that. He has some supporters on council. They're welcome to one by one have their say, be prepared to answer questions as we go. We will move this, we'll keep it in committee. We'll move to the 23rd, will be our final debate. We'll have a rigorous debate, I'm sure, on the 23rd, and have a decision the 23rd as to what we're going to do with one, both, or none. So, Mr. Tooma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to my colleagues on council for this opportunity to speak and address this important issue. First, I want to start by commending Councilman Gallagher and Councilman Brady for their proposed legislation. I think it certainly shows that there's a recognition that we just cannot sit and abdicate our responsibility. There are issues, there's a problem, and we need to correct it. Second, I want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Jones and Ms. Simon, for their support of this legislation. I certainly appreciate them getting on board with this and their discussion as to why they support it. And I'm sure we'll be hearing from them on their own. I'm going to take a little bit of a different format here as far as how this presentation goes from what my colleague did a couple weeks ago. We're going to kind of keep this bare bones and limited to council staff, Khalil Sareen, who helped formulate some of this policy and will answer some of the specific questions and details if necessary. And then myself, as far as what I think are some of the pertinent points after Mr. Serene presents. So to begin with, I believe this proposed legislation before County Council today is a compromise piece of legislation. And I do believe it addresses many of the concerns raised by those who are supporting an elected sheriff running for office. This is not again, to put down any of those opinions by the sheriffs or the professionals who believe that an elected sheriff's position is the way to go. I just think that this legislation actually will address many of their concerns. One of the things that I kept hearing over and over again from the sheriffs and those who presented in support of Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Brady's legislation, was that they were concerned about the autonomy of the position, that it has to be an autonomous position, an independent-minded thinker. And I believe my legislation, our legislation, permits that to occur. I believe there are safeguards in place. I believe legislative oversight is a major part of this legislation and can address many of the concerns and many of the issues that are abundant right now with the sheriff's office. First, this legislation permits the sheriff to do his or her job, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here, to run the jail and make appointments as necessary. It places policy over politics. Second, it allows the sheriff to remain autonomous, as I said, not subservient to a county executive. Third, it provides increased educational and professional standards for those nominated and eventually approved by council. And fourth, it permits the increased legislative oversight of the office, which is so greatly needed given our history in our county. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Serene, and he'll go through the details, and I'll follow up after that. Khalil?
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Chair, the rest of council, Khalil Seren, I am council staff. Had a hand in drafting some of this legislation, and I'll just briefly go through sort of the highlights of the changes that have been made in this proposal. So the first thing to note is that the sheriff is removed from the Article 5 officers and removed from the general understanding that Article 5 officers are appointed by the county executive with confirmation by council, but serve at the pleasure of the county executive. So the major change, the major initial change, is that the removal is dramatically altered. One thing that continues is that in this proposal, the sheriff will continue to be appointed by the county executive and confirmed by council. That does not change despite its removal from Article 5. So it creates a new article, Article 16, that is specific to the sheriff and the sheriff's duties and appointment and removal. The next major change is that there is a set 4-year term. This 4-year term is intended to help to create that autonomy that the councilman spoke about. That set time allows for a periodic reevaluation of the sheriff's performance by the executive and council, because there is a point at which that sheriff will need to be reappointed if the county executive and the council deems to do so. The specifics of the 4-year term are that whoever the current incumbent is when this legislation is adopted and the voters vote to approve it, should they do so, that individual will remain in office as the appointed sheriff and subject to the requirements of this section, finishing a term that would end in December 31st, 2020. At that point, a subsequent sheriff would be appointed for a 4-year term that would begin in January 1st, 2021, and every 4 years after that. It's important to note that any reappointment or filling of a vacancy would complete a term that is already existent, so that 4 years would remain a 4-year term with a set beginning and end date. That 4-year term is staggered with the executive's term, so 2 years into the executive's term, a new sheriff potentially would be appointed. The third important, and I don't know, has this, okay, you have in front of you a set of highlights about this, and so the third on this highlight list, the powers of the sheriff are mostly the same as in the current charter. Currently, the charter allows the sheriff all powers and duties of elected sheriffs as provided by general law. And additionally, those powers and duties provided by council as well. In this case, the powers and duties are, there's an addition that specifies appointment authority as one of the powers and duties of the sheriff that would explicitly call out the power of the sheriff to staff their department and determine who and how many within the bounds of the authority of the council and the authority of Article 9 of the charter, which puts some boundaries on appointment authority. So the sheriff would have the power over their own department, staffing levels, staffing individuals, and those sorts of appointment decisions. It's something that should be noted is there's a section of code that, if this is approved, may need to be adjusted, and that section is section 202.07, Sheriff's Department. 202.07 subsection 1 includes a section that says, with the approval of the county executive, the sheriff shall employ and supervise such number of deputies, assistants, and employees as are reasonably necessary to carry out the department's functions. If you have an interest in expanding the autonomy of the sheriff, then removing that caveat that the county executive approves the sheriff's employment decisions and supervision decisions, that would be necessary. Fourth, the additional qualifications are provided in the new charter section 1601.2 and 1601.3. These additional qualifications are pretty much exactly the same as the additional qualifications provided for in the other charter amendment that would provide for an elected sheriff. And those additional qualifications, we can go over them if you'd like, or if you have any questions about the certifications and the experience and educational requirements of the office. We can go into more detail about that if you have any questions. Number 5 talks about the removal, and this would be removal for cause, and the removal for cause would be in the form of a resolution that could be introduced either by a council member, by the county executive, but would require 8 members of council to vote in favor of that resolution. And importantly, there is also a requirement that the sheriff be provided a public forum to provide their side of the story or some sort of defense against the removal proposition. That would be provided for in an open hearing of council as required by public records and public meeting laws, but would not prohibit the council from deliberating on the question in executive session and having an executive session conversation about the question of removal. And then lastly, this goes back to the appointment and vacancy process. So if there is a vacancy before that term expires, the council will appoint a successor to complete that term, subject to council confirmation. And specifically, if that vacancy occurs within 2 years of the expiration of that 4-year term, if the county executive and the council agree, that new individual can be appointed to complete that term and begin another 4-year term subsequent in the same piece of legislation, the same appointment process. Once again, the appointment, term, removal, and vacancy provisions are identical to what is currently in the charter for the Inspector General. We use that as a model to create some consistency, and because it appears that sort of works to create the kind of autonomy that we're looking for. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Seren. Any questions for Mr. Tuma?
If I could, just briefly, just touching on some of the points that Mr. Seren put forward, I think it's important to understand that I know some folks have asked, why the appointment by the county executive, maybe another branch should be doing this, but I think it's very important to respect the intent of the framers of the charter, and I believe that the appointment power of the county executive it respects the separation of powers. The legislative branch here will have legislative oversight with respect to approving the appointment, with respect for, significantly with respect for approval with the requisite number of votes, supermajority votes, to allow for the removal of an individual from that position. So again, requiring 8 votes from council. Council will certainly have a say in any removal. And again, we're talking about autonomy. We're talking about removing the fear of political repercussions. That would be in this. Importantly and significantly, there's due process involved. There's a public hearing. The individual in that office would be able to plead his or her case to the public, and then if executive session is required and things need to be said in executive session that may be embarrassing, that individual will have an opportunity. And so it's going to be a very rigorous process, and someone's not going to be just removed from that office on a whim. In addition, there is going to be, with the staggered terms, again, an opportunity for that individual holding that office to remain autonomous, to maintain their independence. Because there's going to be a staggered term, it doesn't necessarily ensure that a county executive will be in office during that individual sheriff's term. And then along with that staggered term, it also puts accountability on the individual running for that position or seeking that position, because they know at the end of a set term that he or she, if they want to continue in that job, is going to have to be held accountable to the county council and to the executive, and therefore through our representative democracy, it actually works. I don't know that it's perfect legislation, but it's very pragmatic legislation. And I would ask for your support on this.
Questions for Mr. Tuma? Yes, sir.
Who can initiate an action to remove the sheriff?
I'm gonna let. Well, we want to go through the chair, through Khalil on this.
Well, don't the authors want to answer this?
Well, no, that's fine. I mean,
Whatever, go ahead, whatever's easiest.
it's the county executive who can do that, but the as far as a hearing goes, it's the county council.
No, I got that part, but my question was who can initiate? So if this body feels that the sheriff is not performing, can we, and I'll just use the word impeachment, is there a way in which we could, if it was an elected position, could move to, can this body, if it feels that the sheriff is not performing, the county executive says, no, I want to keep my person there, can this body, still getting the same 8 votes, initiate an action?
It's my understanding we can.
Well, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
yes.
This body could
This body
initiate.
can initiate the hearing.
I didn't
Yes.
read that in here, but that's why I was trying to.
Well, that's why I wanted to let Khalil maybe explain that a little better.
Sure, Mr. Chair, to the council member. In
Mr.
section,
Saran, if you could, on top of that, is it an impeachment of, and is it a trial from the council to that individual?
well, technically, the section that deals with this, the removal section, it's just a removal of an appointed officer. It doesn't use the word impeachment, but it provides for the opportunity to be heard in a public hearing from the sheriff. And it is by resolution receiving the affirmative vote of at least 8 council members. So resolution, as a general rule, can be introduced either by the county executive per our charter or by a member of council. So if the county executive did not feel that behavior of the sheriff warranted removal, but county council did feel that way, a member of council could introduce a resolution removing the sheriff. And if 8 total council members agree, then that would proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone further? Yes, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to direct these questions to Khalil, if that's okay. The first question I have is that if this legislation were to pass and there's an incumbent sheriff in place by that time, it's not clear to me whether either the education or the certification requirements would apply to that person. Can you opine on that?
It is my understanding that the way that this is written, I don't believe it explicitly states that the incumbent sheriff would be required to have obtained a baccalaureate in any field, that kind of thing. But my understanding is that if an incumbent sheriff does not have these requirements, then they are no longer qualified for the position. Just by matter of another section of our charter and general law, that person is no longer qualified for the amended requirements of the position and would be subject at that point to disqualification from the position.
Okay. Second question is if there's an incumbent in place when this legislation passes, the executive would not be making an appointment at that time. That person would just stay in place. And so the executive would not have the opportunity to use the provision that allows you to appoint someone for the remainder of an unexpired term plus another term if there's less than 2 years in a term. So, as I read this, if this legislation were to pass in November of this year, the incumbent sheriff would have 1 year left, and there would be no guarantee that that person would be reappointed in January of 2021. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that could potentially be a problem in recruitment unless assurance would be given that it would be for more than 1 year.
May I respond? With respect to the difficulties in recruitment, I don't believe that I can speak to that particular issue, but I know that at this point, if there are current recruitment efforts in place for an appointed sheriff under our current system, there is still that at-will employment provision that's happening, that's in our current system, and no guarantee of a particular time frame or term. And then secondly, there's no guarantee at this point that the voters would approve this, and given that the next opportunity for approval is in November, and we will, I believe, soon, in the next month, be without a sheriff, we might have an incumbent sheriff in place before this is even voted on.
And Mr. Chairman, to Khalil, as you stated in your presentation, this proposed language removes the sheriff out of Section 5.08 of the Charter. And my question is whether you know if the Charter has any language elsewhere in the Charter that refers to Article 5 officers generally. I know we saw that in some charter amendments that were proposed. Do we have anything like that in the charter itself at this time?
I don't know that offhand, but I will check that and get back to you.
Okay. One other question. Has any thought been given as to whether the proposed certification requirements in 16.02 Part 2 are too detailed to be in charter language, and whether there should be something like that the sheriff will meet within 1 year shall meet certification requirements that shall be specified by ordinance.
In terms of the policy question, I don't know that I can speak to that, but when it comes to the flexibility issue, I think subsection D, which provides for a professional certification or degree related to the management and operation of a jail as may be approved by the council, it provides the kind of flexibility that you're looking for.
Right. Mr. Chairman, just following up on that, Councilman Miller, as far as the certification and such, I mean, we're open to suggestions, ideas to making sure that is practical, so that works for whomever is trying to get their certification. For example, if it requires X number of months to do so, and they only offer it at certain times of the year, we're flexible and open to that as long as the requirements are in place as far as the actual substance. Okay, thank you.
And finally, just a general comment. It's my belief that the sheriff is a professional position requiring professional skills, and as such should be appointed rather than elected. If elected, it could primarily be a question of who has the best last name and who can raise the most money, and also political party considerations and such things. And so, and this amendment also seems to answer some questions about improving the autonomy and performance capabilities of the sheriff. And so, so on that basis, I find this proposal much preferable to the one that we considered last week. The question I'm going to have to deal with is whether we have sufficiently vetted all the language and whether it's sufficiently buttoned down to vote it on to the charter this year. You know, because once we put it in the charter, it's pretty permanent. So that's where the question lies. But I commend the sponsors for bringing this forward and putting together some very good language. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Tuma? Yes, ma'am.
All right. You know, I'm really on the fence here of which way to go. I'm not sure either one is going to bring us where we want to be. But talking about the appointed sheriff, how does the communication improve? How does this get us to a place where we can do our job in oversight when we're not really in the loop on many things that go on here? So how is giving us more oversight, and it sounds like it's at the end, after whatever crisis may have happened, for us to consider a dismissal of this appointed sheriff. what's built into this legislation that gives us the ability to do our jobs and not get into the weeds as we have on a few things here, because we've had to do that. I guess I'm just asking, where are we better when I'm not really that comfortable with the way it is now and how we're finding out about things and things that even happened today that I just heard as a rumor because I have nothing in writing to confirm it. How does that improve this? I don't know if an elected sheriff improves it, but I don't know if this does either, and I'm looking for some answers.
Khalil, if I may, first, Mr. Chair.
Ma'am, Khalil, I think we're done with you.
Yeah,
but,
you know what, Khalil, yeah, thank you
It's
for
kind
your
of
time.
odd, but,
Yeah.
ma'am,
I just.
good job, Khalil.
Well, I
Ms.
just,
Ms.
if I
Simon,
could.
if you wish to answer, please.
I do. I agree with Councilman Baker about that. So Khalil has helped with Kurt craft a separate piece of legislation, which I wasn't going to get into now, but it addresses your concern that I share about the potential of using a best practice of a commission. And I'm not a big fan of commissions overall, but what I have in the works is a commission of 5 people who are going to be able to have a separate third-party oversight that this body is not equipped to get into the weeds on. And I just wanted to put that out there now to your question, because I agree that either way, we really don't have the skills or tools or the ability to get into those weeds. And I think a commission is used in New York and other places. A companion piece to this would be useful, but that's all I have to say for now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to try to answer the Councilwoman's question, and you know, it's a fair question, but I think council as a whole here has to understand what our legislative responsibilities are, and where our duties begin and where they end. I think one of the questions you're asking is really about administrative executive function, and you know, how do we get better administrators or communication from that office? And I don't think that's a question for council. I think that's a question for the county executive. And if this legislation or my colleague's prior legislation doesn't put the executive and his administrators on notice that we're watching, I don't know what will. You can't we don't run jails here. Council doesn't run a jail. That's what we don't do. You know, we can try to communicate. We can maybe bring the sheriff in, have the sheriff report to us, have the county executives, administrators report to us. But, you know, while I appreciate your concern, I don't know that it's part of this legislation. Thank you.
Ms. Stevens, and then.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Council President.
It's not clear to me who the sheriff reports to sometimes, and the other portion is that several layers of bureaucracy get added above. We're all concerned about the jail, but it doesn't appear the sheriff was selecting the warden or jail administrator or whatever you want to call the person who's ultimately responsible for what goes on at a day-to-day office. It appears that those responsibilities were removed. We're not under the sheriff's direct supervision. So to my colleague who said the responsibility of selecting and supervising the sheriff is the executive's responsibility, and we should stay out of the way. It appears to me that the executive deferred or delegated his responsibilities over the sheriff, and the person who was supervising the sheriff had no direct criminal justice experience or certifications by places like the state or the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So the real issue to me is, are we getting real law enforcement, or are we just getting more administration? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. President.
I wanted to ask, I heard Khalil say that to some extent he had modeled some of the work that he did with you on the IG's office. And I know that the IG reports to a council committee on a fairly regular basis. Would it be would this legislation allow for that kind of reporting process to perhaps take place?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I mean, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I would recommend it. I think one of the issues that we have here is a lack of communication, lack of about finding things out after the fact, and I think that would curtail a lot of those issues. A report to council on a whatever we make it, quarterly basis, monthly basis, I don't know, but I'm absolutely open to that, and I absolutely think that helps remedy some of the issues that we're running into administratively.
Okay. I would remind any members of council next Tuesday, we're going to be graced with the presence of the Sheriff of Cuyahoga County for questioning. Mr. Shrine.
Thank you. One of the things that we did, I know it's been referred to as modeling the IG steps. Those of us who have been around for a while remember that we took 2 steps on the IG before it made it onto the ballot language for a charter change. And perhaps this is a time, following Mr. Miller's, I guess, concerns, is that we maybe would go back and revisit the 2-step process that we chose there. One was through action of this council to put more constraints on, find out what needed to be adjusted, and then we put it on as far as a ballot language out there to see whether or not that would go through. And my suggestion, as far as from that standpoint, is there's some commonality in both your pieces of legislation. That is that we cannot continue with what we have. We know we have a problem in place. So that we have a complete agreement. So let's move on now. We also look like we have some complete agreement on educational requirements, on components of what the job entails, about what it takes to run, what our expectations are as far as requiring jail experience, things of that nature. There's nothing that stops this body from actually passing those things, saying, we will not approve without these requirements for your next candidate, period. And we know that what's going to happen is that we're going to more than likely have an opening as sheriff before the Board of Elections can certify either one of these provisions. So we should, as a body, make sure that we write legislation between now and the time that that next appointment comes forward that constrains and picks up the best of both of these 2 pieces of legislation. And perhaps it does become a 2-step process. But at least we will not accept any candidate that does not have the following educational requirements. We will not accept a candidate who does not have jail experience. We will not accept a candidate, so don't even present them to us without these constraints, and we pick out the best of both and put that in the form of legislation, put it forward so that before we even get a nomination of a candidate, because we're going to have an interim, and then it addresses the problem that Khalil talked about, that if the person was to be appointed by this body for a recommended that doesn't have an education, then we got a lame duck, and we got to kick them out. So,
yeah, I appreciate the comments, Mr. Schwan, but I think the difference here is with the IG, there was a 2-step process because there was no IG in the original charter. And here we have, a sheriff provision. I mean, I think we can shore up some of these things, but I don't know that it's necessary to carry it out any longer than need be. I think there's a pretty general consensus that, as you said, something needs to be done. And I'm hearing a lot of the same things, and I don't know that the concerns are ever going to necessarily be addressed through legislation. I think a lot of these concerns are more administrative, to be honest.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Want to echo the comments of my colleagues. When it comes to the requirements, we're getting a professional now. That's what I believe. We're getting a professional, not someone elected, someone who knows the job. I have to agree with Councilman Schron. If someone comes forward, it's what he's saying is laid out right here. The executive should not bring someone forward who does not meet those requirements, who is not a professional, who knows this job. And with that in place, not only the educational requirements, but we're saying he has the explicit authority to appoint. That was a problem. So this legislation, I think, goes point by point with the things that were fundamental problems with why things were not working. And we're seeing indictments now for individuals who organizationally, by the organizational chart, were under the sheriff, but operationally, that's not how things were playing out. It was a problem. This changes that. This is the oversight that we were meant to provide. And that is our role. Again, it's not administrative, but we're doing what we're supposed to do. So when we put a professional in the position and make sure he has the complete autonomy to hire those under him, and they cannot be added or taken from him, then we're addressing those fundamental problems.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'll remind all council that professional qualifications are in both. Any further? Yes, sir.
Might respond, and you say they are in both, and that's correct. And there is tremendous overlap. And again, I applaud both my colleagues. I don't see this as a bitter debate about the issue, but I do see a fundamental difference. We left the old government for a reason. We left it for a reason. And I don't want us to be 10 years away and start to romanticize the way things were and simply go back to it. That's not what we should be doing. The sheriffs and the public defenders who spoke said in the old government they had the autonomy to do what they were doing. They were accountable to the people, and they were independent, and they did the work. That was true. But they also said the problem they had was the elected person began to see himself as the focal point. And what that means, it was very euphemistic the way he said it, but when he says he made himself the focal point, what he was really saying is a public servant became selfish. And he was not, and the paper didn't catch that, the people don't correct that, it is corrected. It did not get corrected until the federal government came in. And that is what we are addressing here. This creates a new dynamic and one where we can hold them more accountable and give them the independence that we had from the past.
Thank you, Mr. Tuma and Ms. Simon.
Okay, and this is just slightly deviating from what we were talking about. Section 16.011 says the sheriff shall also have such powers and duties as shall be established by this charter or by ordinance, meaning that if we would like a reporting requirement, we can do so by ordinance if we move forward with this legislation and it passes. So that's something that we can add to that, a reporting requirement that I know some of you folks were concerned about. So I just thought I'd add that. Thank you.
Ms. Simon.
Thank you so much. The charter does not address the situation council currently finds itself in. And if we really talk about the problem here and why we have to face a charter amendment, which I think we do, it's because of a problem of not necessarily qualifications of a professional, although we need that. It's because we had a sheriff or have a sheriff that was not performing his duties, or we have an executive that's not enabling that sheriff to perform duties. That is where the problem lies. I'm not sure which of those two factors have resulted in the deaths, but those are the two issues. The first charter amendment does not necessarily solve either one of those two problems. When we look at, I've seen our best sheriff in my tenure as Sheriff Bova, one of the best sheriffs, and I've seen before the new government one of the worst sheriffs. It was Sheriff McFall, not because he wasn't able to handle the jail well, but because he had other issues that were found to be corrupt. So, the elected sheriff is not the answer to the problem that we have. The problem is a sheriff having the autonomy to be able to perform and not be afraid of being fired. But the second problem is this council has no teeth, and we've been criticized and also blamed for this problem. And, we have oversight, and Chairman Gallagher has done a stellar job of having aggressive, informative oversight hearings over the past 6 months. And that's all we can do is to come in here and ask for answers. And if they don't show up, we can issue subpoenas. But at the end of the day, unless there's action from the top, we can't change the problems that were just laid out. So the way we can have teeth is with regard to having the charter amendment that I support is to be able to, A, give the new sheriff space, not afraid to perform or be fired, and B, if they're not performing, then we as a body can come in with the ability to, as Councilman Schron says, impeach and remove for cause with due process. And I think that solves it, but it's not an elected sheriff that's going to solve these problems. In fact, I think it was Sheriff Reed who came in and talked about a PIO from Maricopa County in Arizona as an example of elected sheriff. For me, is a horror. That's exactly why an elective sheriff is not the answer. That guy was in office for 18 years, repeatedly elected, and now is defying court orders from the Supreme Court. So he is a great example of why. I don't need to use McFall because actually he did a good job as a sheriff. But lastly, I am exploring a commission, 5-panel, to be able to inform us because the state didn't do its job apparently either. Coming in and giving us passing grades. And the IG needs a place for complaints that come in, whistleblower or otherwise, a place to go. I'd like to see somebody who is a former inmate. I'd like to see law enforcement, 5 people who can also inform us in addition to the sheriff. Is that adding a layer? Maybe, but maybe we need to do that now because we're facing a crisis. But that's my comments.
Thank you, ma'am. And I would remind the lady that Sheriff Arpaio was elected for 18 years and then unelected, so the system works. He doesn't have a, oops. Yes, sir.
18 years, that's just, yeah. The only other thing I have to add here is, I think we've all come to the agreement that something needs to be done. And again, I'll appeal to your pragmatism. This allows us to step in the event there are issues. Again, removes politics, makes the individual somebody who is independent-minded, independent thinker. Again, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but I think it's the best proposal moving forward, and I would ask for your support. And like Councilwoman Simon said, it certainly allows us to fulfill our legislative oversight duties, and with the authority and the backing of the citizens of Cuyahoga County.
Thank you, sir. Anything further? I will close this with thank you for that. I do appreciate it. I only have a comment for Mr. Miller. I think we go to a slippery slope when we say that the sheriff has to be appointed because of the qualifications. You're looking at judges that are elected because of qualifications. You're looking at a prosecutor that's elected because of certain qualifications. So to not go back to this will be a discussion and a debate for the 23rd, but I would hope that unintended circumstances and consequences aren't part of what we end up doing. I think the worst thing we could do is pass something, like Mr. Schron said, that isn't ready, becomes law, and becomes worse than what we have now. We have 9 bodies and about 80 million reasons why we need to make a change. And when all of that comes out, when all of that's flushed out, the people of Cuyahoga County, in my opinion, in one way or another, are going to send a message to this committee, this council, this administration as to how they feel about those 80 million reasons and those 9 dead bodies. This council has worked hard, harder than anybody can imagine. We've taken the slings and the arrows of the media. Keep doing it. I don't care. You're not going to get me. You're not going to, I don't really give a darn. We're going to get this thing fixed, and I mean these 11 people are going to get this thing fixed, regardless of how it ends up. We've stayed together. We've fought our fights behind closed doors. We've stayed together as an elected body. I couldn't be more proud. These are my brothers and sisters, and we're going to run this county as best we can. We're going to get out of this hole that we're in, and we're in a hole that this county council didn't put us in. We're going to dig ourselves out of it. So regardless of what anybody has to say, keep shooting the slings and arrows, but this group's going to stay together. We're going to get it done. And I'm proud of each and every one of you. Thank you.